Lauren, welcome to the podcast and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Alex. It's really lovely to finally connect with you.
Yeah, we were saying just before hitting record that we've kind of followed each other on Instagram for a while, but we haven't sort of properly connected. And I've been really excited to have this conversation because there certainly seems to be some overlap in regards to, I guess, both personal experiences we have had, but also with our outlook and philosophy on healing and transformation. So for those people that aren't aware of you and your story, are you happy to start with a little bit of an intro?
Yeah, of course, that's fine. So, yeah, it's a big old story, so I'll try and condense it into just a few minutes. But so I'm a conventionally trained doctor, and I started practicing medicine in 2013. And then not long after that, about a year later, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was 28, just about to turn 29. And just at a time when you're getting your life kind of on track, finally feeling like an adult, started work, everything was kind of going in the right direction, this diagnosis came into my life. And it actually progressed over quite a few years. So I had initial surgery to remove the tumor. It was a malignant melanoma on my legs. So I had initial surgery and was trying to kind of go back to work, trying to keep my life on track. And then the cancer just kept coming back. So I left work and went through surgery after surgery. And it really did feel like we were playing cat and mouse with the tumors. So I'd have an operation, and then a few months later on a scan, the cancer would be back. So on an emotional level, that was a huge kind of process to be going through, this constant just chasing tumors. It felt like, and there wasn't any treatment. Melanoma doesn't respond to chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So unlike other cancers, I didn't have that option, that treatment. And it got to a point where in 2015, October 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 4. So I had tumors at that point in my lung, my adrenal gland, my chest wall. And it really felt like it was coming to the end of the road in lots of ways. You know, obviously I still kept a level of hope. There was some optimism there, because I think that's just how we operate. We're desperately kind of clinging on to life, no matter how dismal our prognosis looks. And I was so incredibly fortunate that a new cutting edge treatment, immunotherapy, came out just at the time that I needed it. So I was able to start. I think I was one of the first patients in the UK to start immunotherapy treatment off trial at the beginning of 2016. But from 2014, which was my initial diagnosis, to that point, 2016, there was a lot that happened to me within that. So alongside all of the surgeries, I went on my own journey to explore ways I could support my body to heal, which I know most people do when they have a cancer diagnosis. We become really our own experts in our bodies and what we need to heal. And that took me on much more of a mind-body approach, away from conventional medicine. Obviously, I was still accepting conventional medicine alongside everything, but I started looking at what we now call lifestyle medicine, really, which is obviously looking at my diet. I went plant-based, I was juicing, taking key supplements, exercising, meditating, practicing yoga, and just brought all of these practices in, really, and just became much more interested in the way that we can help our body to heal. But also I was really intrigued about the concept of kind of what leads to disease in the first place. And I really started analysing my own life and just realised how chronically stressed I'd been for quite a few years, and just became curious really about whether that could have potentially had an impact on me developing cancer. Because as we know, when you're under chronic stress, your immune system and hormone, everything kind of in the body, hormones, everything goes out the window. So yeah, it's just been a journey of learning much more about the human body than I ever really learned at medical school. And that's where I am today, just still learning. And it's a really interesting path. And I'm just so lucky because I did go into remission not long after starting my treatment. So I had a total of 2 years of immunotherapy, but within 6 months I had no evidence of disease. And that's coming up to 5 years now, which is amazing, given I had a prognosis. My prognosis was about a year at one point.
Okay, that is amazing.
So yeah, there's a lot in there.
And it kind of relates. I've spoken to a couple of other guests who have some sort of similar backstory, and this kind of immersion into lifestyle medicine has always been sort of the key feature of that story, ultimately, obviously sort of complementing the more traditional route as well. And there was a term on your website, actually. Well, there's a few terms I've scribbled down, but the one that kind of resonates based on what you've said there is this idea of difficulties potentially being catalysts for transformational post-traumatic growth, which I thought was such a great way of kind of reframing the experience ultimately.
Yeah, that's definitely been a big lesson through all of this, because when you're in the experience, when you're having such a huge life crisis, be it a health crisis or financial crisis, relationship crisis, whatever it is, it can be really easy to almost fall into a victim mode, and it's hard to start reframing and thinking, actually, is there gifts in this challenge? And maybe the word gift isn't quite right, but is there a silver lining here? Is there something that I can grow from? And I think just finding some meaning in it is so important, because meaning just helps us feel better anyway. So if I was just always searching for meaning and trying to be proactive in that way, and of course I had plenty of days, weeks, months where I didn't feel like I was growing. If anything, I felt like I was regressing and things are really, really tough. But looking back now, I always just experienced such growth on the other side of every new surgery. Every time the cancer came back, it definitely just cracked me wide open and helped me to grow a little bit more. But yeah, it's not easy, not an easy journey.
No, but that's such a, I think, important sort of point, isn't it? This idea of, within your journey, there was, I guess, putting words in your mouth to some degree, sort of an upward trajectory overall, but obviously with those peaks and troughs along the way. And I think, as you say, we can get so stuck in those troughs and forgetting that if we can step back just for a little bit, sometimes, we can appreciate that, okay, we are on this journey and we just need to get out this trough and into the next peak, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And you remind me, actually, there's a graph that I've seen that's about trauma, and how when we're experiencing, it's really kind of stress and trauma, but how when we're, every time we get put under stress, under trauma, we might move along the curve a little bit further, and then you have these dips as well, where you can actually get stuck in, and you struggle to kind of come back to that homeostasis, that balance. And the more traumatic, the more challenging the experiences, you do kind of keep going up and up on this graph, but also the dips become deeper and deeper, so those troughs are harder to get out of. So we do have to work harder to bring ourselves back into balance and homeostasis, the more challenging things are. But actually, it is possible for all of us, no matter how far along we are, no matter how traumatized. When I say trauma, I really mean, something that impacts us on a level that, because we feel so out of control, so unsafe, that we end up then quite often disconnecting from our body. So really, it's a process of coming back into our body, and that's how we start the healing journey.
That's really well put. So I guess with that in mind, a key question that comes to mind is were there any sort of tools or anything you learned along the way to help with that sort of reconnection with the body?
I think, like so many people, my first port of call was yoga, because I had a very, very minimal practice before I was diagnosed. And it was amazing how I felt so safe in my body. Because I think when something, when we have a diagnosis like cancer or something that's potentially life-threatening, we do disconnect from our body. It's such a it's just something that happens quite automatically, and it's a protection mechanism, but also it's something that we have to work at to come back into our body. And we do, unless it's pointed out to us, or unless we gain that awareness, we maybe don't even realize that we've done it. And I just noticed that whenever I came onto my yoga mat, I would feel really strong and safe. And then when I'd leave my yoga mat, I could feel I disconnected a bit from my body, and I felt really out of control, and I didn't feel safe. And it was an amazing reaction how different the two feelings were. So yoga was really my entry point, and I went off and did a yoga teacher training afterwards, just because I was so interested about this amazing tool that I'd learned. And then things like, obviously, meditation are great to bring you back into your body, but sometimes, I know for me, I struggled to do the sitting practice. So I'd do walking meditations, which are great for me. Just being out in nature, grounding, taking my shoes and socks off, grounding into the earth. Anything that could just, bring me back into my body, but also bring me back into the moment, because we can trauma, and I'm going to keep using this word trauma, because I do feel that cancer, anyone who gets a cancer diagnosis, they're probably going to experience trauma. And what trauma does is take us out of the present moment, and it's really hard to be in present. So things like grounding, meditation, yoga, anything, movement practices like dancing, shaking, it's just such a great way to bring us back into the present.
Brilliant. So again, I guess they're all such accessible tools as well, which is, I think, the beauty of that. And I don't know, there's this clip, there's a TED talk that I often send to clients, and it kind of resonated with me there because it talks about how meditation influences the actual kind of functioning of the brain. So from memory, they basically took a group of addicts and they did an MRI scan on them, and they found the prefrontal cortex was sort of offline, so to speak, and the amygdala was incredibly active. And I think over something like a 12-week period of 20 minutes of meditation a day, as you can imagine, there was kind of an opposing response from a brain function perspective. So the prefrontal cortex had kind of kicked in and the amygdala had calmed down. And this idea that these sorts of interventions or activities can have such a profound impact on those parts of the brain, which then allows us to kind of make more logical decisions. And sometimes I found people really kind of resonate with the idea that rather than thinking about meditation as just trying to create some Zen states to keep us calm, that there are these sort of physiological changes that can ground us, but also just help us make better decisions in our day-to-day, which kind of to some degree ties in with what you were saying there.
Yeah, and it's just that mind-body connection, isn't it? That obviously is really coming to the forefront now, because I mean, for so long in medicine, we just didn't put the two and two together. There were doctors of the mind, there were doctors of the body, and there wasn't really an overlap. And like you're saying, there's so much science now, so much research that shows that the mind and the body are connected. So, for example, with the amygdala, anything that we can do to kind of help take us out of that survival, because it's really our limbic system, isn't it? The amygdala, it's that survival mode. It's the kind of ancient reptilian part of the brain that wants to keep us safe. And practices like meditation are so good for just so many things. Like you said, it's everything from increasing our concentration. It's endless what it can do for us.
Do you find one of the things I certainly find sometimes is clients can really struggle with sort of starting a meditation practice? Is that something you found? And if so, are there any kind of general tips you can provide our listeners in regards to maybe how to start a practice if they're brand new to this?
So I can talk also from personal experience, because I definitely struggled to start a meditation practice, and I went through all of the apps, everything from Headspace and Calm, and I went and studied Vedic meditation, did a course in that, just kept trying lots of different things to just see what landed with me. And I think that's really the key with meditation, because there's no one size fits all. Obviously, ideally we would just be able to sit for 10 or 20 minutes, but for some people that's really hard. It's really difficult. So it's quite nice if you can just find something that works for you. And like I said, for me, my initial entry point was to just go out on walking meditations, because we have this idea of somebody sitting cross-legged in this meditative state, but actually anything that makes you feel more connected to yourself, takes you out of your mind, that is really a meditation. So you get to define what meditation is for you. Having said that, obviously just finding stillness and that silence is really lovely and really important as well. So if you can just start small, you can just start with maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes and gradually build up. Because I know when I started my Vedic meditation practice, we were told you have to sit for 20 minutes 2 times a day. And that's actually just felt on a very cognitive level. It was like, oh, that's a lot of time. Obviously, you can find time to do it, but it almost put me off doing it straight away, because I thought, how am I going to find 40 minutes a day? But we've all got, 5 minutes a day to sit. So I think it's just about trying lots of different things and finding out what works for you. I've landed on the Sam Harris Waking Up app.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether you've heard of that one.
Yeah.
He's got free trials all the time. So if you're interested in trying that one, I think that's a wonderful entry point to meditation.
Brilliant. And yeah, that's such a good point in regards to, what is our thoughts of what meditation is to begin with. So whether it's a walking meditation, or I guess, your yoga was a form of movement meditation. So as you say, there are all these other ways that we can start that process as well. And I can relate to that. When I started, it was as simple as, I think, a 3-minute meditation, and that just very slowly evolved into a half-hour meditation. And it went from being a 3-minute inconvenience to a sort of a half-hour, highlight of my day. Ultimately, it's a really interesting journey that you can go on with it.
Yeah, and I also go through phases. I'll have
Yes.
months where I'm consistent and I'll do it every morning, and other months I won't. And I think it's just about being compassionate with yourself on the journey as well. And hopefully at some point you'll get into a rhythm that fits around your lifestyle. But equally, if it goes out the window for a while, but they do say, don't they, that, I can't remember exactly the quote, but if you say you haven't got time for meditation, you're exactly the person who does need to meditate.
Right.
So it's also just kind of realizing, maybe if you're feeling a little bit out of control, everything's feeling a bit chaotic and you're stressed, just realizing that actually you do need to sit down and meditate.
Yeah, that's it, I think. And that idea of, it can just feel uncomfortable, can't it, at the beginning, I think, which was one of the reasons why it's so challenging. But certainly when I've been really, when I've been in the flow and I've had a daily practice, there are times I can look back where, for example, if I've been waiting for a train, I can just be in like a standing meditation for 5 minutes. And it's almost like whenever there's an opportunity just to get centered and ground myself, I actually kind of really looked forward to that sort of just little pocket of stillness during just like your normal day behaviors. So it is an interesting one, how you change your relationship with meditation, with kind of just getting into the present ultimately, which at other times I've been hopeless at. I will just add.
I think we all have, but it's it's also realizing you're playing a long game. We live in a society where we always want that quick fix, and obviously taking 5-10 minutes for yourself and sitting in silence will in that moment help you to hopefully shift into a parasympathetic state, and you will hopefully feel more relaxed for the rest of the day and less reactive. But at the same time, with the consistency of a practice like that, you're always playing a long game. You're doing it so that over the course of months and years, then you notice the change in yourself, and you feel more connected to your intuition and just the less reactive in your everyday, and you notice how you're showing up. So I think that's another thing, like all of these practices, we just want the quick fix, don't we? And we want to feel better straight away, but it's just having that in the back of your mind that if you keep showing up, if you keep sitting down, whether it's sitting down for meditation or going out for a walk or doing some exercise or practicing yoga, we're always looking for the longer term outcome, really.
Yeah, that's an important message, which I think there was another little statement which I loved. So I read your little article on your psychedelic experience as well, which if you're happy to, I'd love to kind of touch on. But I think it was within that article that you said that, you'd want to offer, paraphrasing here, people the gift of surrender and peace, which kind of, again, ties in with what you just said there. And I do think sometimes it can be, I find, and I've certainly found it in my own journey, that as we're struggling with health challenges, we can sometimes, I feel, be holding on to things really tightly and trying to control our day and our behaviors as a way to heal. And one of the lessons I think I've learned is pretty much every single time I feel I've had a big shift in, not necessarily health, but sort of just me existing, shall we say, it's normally been as a result of surrendering to the experience, whether is psychedelics or whether that's like just a breathwork session, or whether it's sometimes to some degree even from a dietary perspective, and just allowing myself to enjoy the meal, rather than having to think it's got to be a certain way for me to actually nourish myself and heal myself further. So I'd love to kind of hear your experiences and your thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah, I love talking about surrender, actually, because I think it's one of those aspects of health and healing that aren't really talked about. It's not really mentioned much, but actually the practice and the process of surrender has such an impact on our physiology, because when we're being super controlled and we're dictating every part of our life, we end up, it's so stressful. It's really, really, it's not an enjoyable experience. And then when you can just surrender, because we have to just recognize that we can only control so much in our lives, and quite often things are out of our control, and it's knowing when we can just kind of let go and not white knuckle our way through a situation. So when we get to that practice of surrender, when we know when we need to let go, it just frees us up to just relax and be in that parasympathetic state, which is really healing anyway. And then on just an emotional level, surrender is really expansive. And whereas control and trying to, just control everything it can be the opposite, constrictive. It can be tightening, all of the tension that happens with that. So it's a real kind of very physical experience that you have when you surrender, as well as it's almost like a big breath out. I like to think of it.
Yeah, I'd sometimes describe it as, it's kind of like a pressure valve has been opened, and there's just this letting it's almost like a huge sigh, but you can just feel it physically, energetically. It's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, and I took a long time to come to it though myself, because it's not in my nature, I don't think, to surrender. And with my own health journey, as I mentioned, in those first few years, I was really looking at lifestyle medicine. I became so controlling really about my diet. I turned vegan for about a year, really looking at my gut health, looking at everything I was putting into my body, and trying some weird and wonderful diets as well, which weren't so healthy, really controlling my supplements, things like intermittent fasting, all of the things that we all talk about. But I was doing it in a way that it wasn't an enjoyable period of my life. I mean, it was a challenging period of my life anyway, but actually throwing all of that on top of it as well took away any room for pleasure and enjoyment. I wouldn't eat a piece of cake, I wouldn't eat chocolate unless it was 90% or something. And I just think it's such a shame when you're living like that. And I understand that I was being driven by fear at the time, but there's just a fine line, isn't there, with anything, between what's actually good for us on a soul level as well as the physical level.
And how did that kind of evolve for you? I guess at sort of what point were you able to look back and think, actually, I've been driven more from fear here, and maybe I've gone over that kind of healthy threshold of surrender and control, for want of a better word?
It was between stage 3 and stage 4. So I had another surgery when the cancer came back, and I was classed as stage 3. So the cancer then was in my lymph nodes. And even though I then became no evidence of disease on scans, the back of my mind, I just had this awful feeling the cancer was going to come back. So really, in the year between the stage 3 and the stage 4 diagnosis, I was so careful about what I was eating. I was meditating twice a day. I was practicing yoga. And I think it was, to be honest, when the cancer came back, there was a sense of, are you kidding here? I've done everything I can to try and support my body to heal and fight cancer cells. And I swung the other way for a little while and just kind of gave up and was like, do you know what? I'm not going to be juicing twice a day anymore. I'm going to eat what I want. And it was only actually that I think my palate had changed in those years anyway. I didn't really enjoy, I think that's what happens, isn't it? When you're eating so healthily, I didn't actually enjoy the junk food, and I felt rubbish when I was eating it. So I just for a few weeks, maybe a month, I let go completely. And then I just came back to a healthy medium, I think. And I've just stayed at that point now. I'm definitely I've definitely let some unhealthy habits creep back in, but I think that's fine. It's okay.
Yeah, it's getting that. it's a really tricky one. I certainly can sometimes struggle as a practitioner, as well as from a, I guess, a personal perspective with, what is the balance that either I or this person needs? Because you don't want to be the person that's kind of pushing the boundary and bringing in a little bit more sort of surrender and sort of relaxation, when sometimes that might not be exactly what's required at that point in time. And it's, as you say, it's that balance of trying to, I guess, intuitively understand what's best for not just our physical bodies, but, as you say, our soul or our spiritual essence or emotional essence, etc. But I guess that's, to some degree, the human experience, really. It's trying to balance all of these things.
Yeah, and just checking in with yourself and seeing what's the energy behind any decisions. So like you said, sometimes if it's fear-based, the energy we're bringing to those decisions and those actions, they don't feel right anyway, and actually more stress inducing and exhausting. Whereas the question I always used to ask, like I used to really enjoy looking at a piece of, I don't know, pomegranate, say, or whatever it was I was about to eat, and just thinking, oh, this is really going to nourish my body. This is really like a gift to my body putting this in. And I think when you bring that kind of energy to it, it's not controlling. Just because I was eating a lot of pomegranates during that time, or I was eating a lot of, what else did I have? Shiitake mushrooms, things like that. I was eating an awful lot of them. But as long as the energy behind it was kinder and more loving to my body, rather than thinking I must eat this because I've read that they potentially have anti-cancer properties.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think you can feel that energy, can't you? If you just, again, sort of take the step back and ground yourself, you can sense when something's the right decision or what kind of energy is coming with it. So I think that's a really powerful tip for people to do in our day to day. So obviously, with my background in sort of nutritional therapy and speaking to all my colleagues around this, there is a sense that we can so focus on the dietary side as a key modality in the healing process. And obviously it can be, but I do sometimes think it can even be overplayed a little bit, depending obviously on the context of the situation for that individual. But again, thinking about it from that perspective of, can we bring in as many foods as possible to nourish the body, rather than what seems to often be the case, which is sort of focusing on the things to avoid because in some way they might be problematic for us. And again, it's just flipping around to focusing on what can we bring in rather than focusing on what we can remove. And that takes us back, I guess, to what you said around the expansion and the contraction of surrender and control.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, I think food is such a wonderful entry point to this whole area of healing the body, because it's really the low hanging fruit, isn't it, that we can if there's something in your life that you want to improve, whether it's your mood, we know that the food we has an impact on our mood. Maybe it's something like cancer, whatever it is. Of course, food is a really important starting point. But like you said, we can just get fixated on it because it's not the be all and end all. If we're only looking at food, if we're not looking at how we're feeling emotionally, if we're not looking at our relationships, our community, we can be eating as healthy as we like, but there's still going to be lots of stress and therefore inflammation going on in our body. So it is really that whole picture approach that we need to be taking. But yeah, food is such a wonderful way to look after ourselves, and it's just doing that with a little bit of control, a little bit of consideration, but not going into the extreme control.
Yeah, because again, as you say, the idea of culture and the social elements of food is such a profound element of it. So whether you go and, I guess, look at the Mediterranean diet, but that's ignoring the Mediterranean lifestyle that kind of is within the context of that. But within that, and if you're happy to kind of share around it, I'm kind of curious where the psychedelic side of things comes into it. And I ask, and I'm super curious just because of, I guess, my own experiences. And I'm always just fascinated to hear other people's stories and how it's maybe changed their outlook slightly on healing and on sort of well-being from a human perspective, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I've been following your posts on psychedelics for a long time. I think they're wonderful. And we've definitely got a lot in common in that area. So my psychedelic, so just to give anyone a bit of context, I recently wrote an article that I think you just referenced, the one that I published with Drug Science, which is the UK, it's David Nutt's and his team's kind of organisation that's driving drug policy reform in the UK and worldwide as well. And David kindly came on my podcast last year, and we were talking about psychedelics, and I mentioned that I'd had a psychedelic experience that had been really healing, and he just said, well, if you wouldn't mind, could you write an article, because there's a lot of scientists and doctors in this space shouting about the new research, but actually patient stories have a really, you know, we've seen with the cannabis industry that actually patient stories hold a lot of weight, and the fact that I kind of bridge both worlds, you know, having been a patient and also working in the medical world. So I was a little bit tentative and a little bit unsure whether to do it. It's taken me about 6 months to actually sit down and write it, because I think just anyone sticking their head above you know, the pulpit, I was a little bit worried, is this going to come back and bite me? Am I going to, you know, even though I went to a legal retreat in the Netherlands, so I haven't broken any laws, but there's still a lot of stigma, isn't there? And I wasn't sure about, should I speak up openly? And I thought, actually, do you know what? Things are never going to change if we just keep staying quiet. And I did have such a profound healing experience, and I have become such an advocate for their use now, especially in the therapeutic context. I thought, no, I'll write this article. So the article's up. If you do fancy reading it, it's up on the Drug Science website. But yeah, I came to this because it's funny how things kind of open up on your own healing journey. So I definitely started with the food and the yoga and the meditation, and definitely more on the very kind of, I guess, mainstream lifestyle aspects that we all know are so important. And then I had another experience where I was in a car accident not long after going into remission, and I had a really, really awful car accident. I broke my leg. I was in a wheelchair for four or 5 months, basically to the best part of a year learning to walk again.
Wow.
And because of that car accident, I was then offered psychological therapy to deal with some of the hypervigilance I was experiencing. And yeah, I just felt quite jumpy when I was on my crutches crossing the road, and was also having quite a few flashbacks every day of the moment that the car hit me. So I had a therapy called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. EMDR, I can't remember the full what it stands for. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, I think that's it. And I just got chatting to the psychologist who did this for me, and she just, you know, we were talking about trauma and how really I'd gone through yet another trauma, being hit by a car, whereas this one was very physical. And she just casually mentioned psychedelics and plant medicine, and how they were really quite an amazing tool for healing, especially trauma. So she just planted a seed, and I went away and started researching, and found quite a lot of new research that was coming out. And it was interesting because it then tied in, one of the studies I found was one of the Johns Hopkins early studies looking at psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, for end of life cancer patients, and how it had really, really helped patients experiencing anxiety and depression, hopelessness, to really heal that and just have a much better quality of life as a result. So I just thought, right, I don't know, I didn't actually feel that I was still, you know, traumatized as such from having had stage 4 cancer, but as we know, we hold so much in the subconscious, and so much trauma is held in the body. And I just experienced that with the car accident, the fact that I'd then been having this hypervigilance and this flashbacks that I couldn't control. It just shows that trauma is stored in the body. So I went off to the Netherlands purely with the intention to see if there was anything I could let go of, anything that I wasn't aware that I was holding on to, just to see if I could, it was curiosity, but I did also feel there was things to be shifted. And I went off and had this just incredible week experience back in 2019. And that's really just sparked my fascination with psychedelics. And it's just for the time, isn't it? We're looking at, there's new research coming out every week. And it really is amazing the way that psychedelics seem to be able to help everything from, you know, traumatic experiences, end of life anxiety, addiction, potentially eating disorders, maybe Alzheimer's, you know, the list goes on and on and on. So
Yeah.
it's quite an amazing field.
Yeah, it's incredible. I don't know if have you come across the book The Immortality Key, I think it's called.
I haven't got that one. I haven't heard that one.
So it's really interesting because the whole book is basically around it's factually researched by I'm going to get this wrong, but I guess someone from a sort of philosophical historical background, basically, who's never done psychedelics. So he can't, you know, you can't have that claim that he's just one of those other guys who's done psychedelics and has now has some crazy out there theories. But it's all around essentially how civilization and potentially religions have been influenced, if not founded, by psychedelic experiences back in sort of ancient Greece. And there's this incredible journey he's gone on, speaking with various people within the different fields to come up with this sort of I guess hypothesis or theory, but it's sort of very well historically backed, and it's just an absolutely fascinating read that I think anyone who has an interest in psychedelics will be interested in that sort of journey that the author went on. But yeah,
check that one out.
It is fascinating because when you look at some of that history and you look at what's going on in today's sort of society within society, you just think there's a perfect fit here. And I sometimes worry that I'm kind of overly advocating for psychedelic use because I just think it can be such a transformation experience. And I think I posted not that long ago about the idea that, and I'm not the only one to have said it, obviously, but psychedelics, even from like a climate change environmental perspective, because of the research showing how they connect us to nature, there's got to even be a role for them from that sort of perspective if we're trying to shift people's perspectives and relationships with the environment at large. So, you know, it's incredible. Love it.
That's the thing. I think as a doctor, I'm focused on the potential for it as a therapeutic tool. And yet as a human, I can definitely see, and as someone who's had the experience, and like you said, I felt that deep connection to nature, that oneness. And I just think there's such potential here. You know, we're at really a tipping point in human history. We're either going to go down mass extinction, or potentially, I think, with the help of psychedelics, we might well actually turn things around and just become much more conscious of what we're doing to our planet. But, you know, it has to really come also, you know, there's a lot of people taking psychedelics, like, you know, underground, and yet it really has to come from more of a top-down approach, because we do need that government change that's going to help things. So yeah, I think psychedelics, I think we need to shift drug policy, and the reform's going to happen through the therapeutic avenue. And yet it's such a shame that we do have to focus on it, the tools, as therapeutic, because I think just as agents of change and transformation, for people who are not so-called, you know, sick, they're really powerful as well. So yeah, it's just such a shame they were ever made illegal in the first place, really, isn't it, the war on drugs.
And am I right in saying you're doing some sort of professional training in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy?
Yeah, so I've joined up with, there's a group of 16 of us, different professionals, doctors, psychologists, some guides, psychotherapy guides, and we have just started a training together, which is great. So in the UK, there's not really a formal training at the moment. There's quite a few that have been set up. Obviously, MAPS run one in the States. There's quite a few happening now in Canada. Australia have got one. And the UK, I think there's going to be a lot more coming through in the next few years, because there's no doubt in my mind that these substances will be rescheduled at some point so they can be used at least by psychiatrists or therapists. And we're not going to have the manpower, we're not going to have the people trained up to sit with people. So the trainings will definitely come, but this is kind of more of a, it doesn't have a accreditation as such, but it's a lovely group, and it's just wonderful to be really held in a container where we're all sharing wisdom and experiences and knowledge. Yeah, it's good. It's really great.
Amazing. Where did you do it in the Netherlands, out of curiosity, if you're happy to share?
I went with the Psychedelic Society, the UK Psychedelic
Okay, yeah.
Society, which is now called Alalaho, I believe.
Yes.
They've changed their name, but there's quite a lot. There's some great different
Yeah.
retreats there. Did you go as well? Have you been over to?
I went to Synthesis.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in 2019. So yeah, we did it the same year.
Same, yeah. Because they're just starting a training as well, I understand.
Yeah, so they've
Yeah.
I think they start potentially next month. They've got kind of a 9-month training program. So yeah, that got a lot of attention. I think they had about 350 participants, and they could have about 35 people actually do the program. So they got overwhelmed quite a lot. But it shows you what's kind of, hopefully what's going to come. And as you say, legalizing it and having that framework there is probably the only real way that it's going to be able to influence on a mass scale ultimately.
Yeah, and I think everyone's being very cautious because of what happened in the 60s and 70s, isn't it? Right? You know, we don't want to shout too loud how incredible these tools are, because obviously, you know, they need to be respected and taken with care and in the right setting. So there's lots to be considered, but at the same time, I think just talking about them and getting more people interested and curious about their healing potential is just so important.
Yeah, and you used a great word in your article in regards to the importance of setting, the idea that they can be, you know, quite destabilizing was the word you used that I thought was nice. So the importance of having that sort of an experienced facilitator, guides, therapist who is able to sort of support you through that journey, especially I think obviously if there is a background of trauma or illness. That's obviously a really important part of this as well. So it is going to be exciting. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. But one thing I would love for you to expand on, if you're happy to, is you've got a little paragraph in your website around this idea of the difference between being cured and healed. And I think it's a really lovely perspective for people. Because sometimes, I guess, if I'm working with someone with an autoimmune condition, etc., a common question is this idea of, you know, can I actually get cured from this, for example? So are you happy to kind of share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, yeah, healing and curing. I mean, I hadn't really heard of the word healing during medical school, other than if we talk about healing a wound or healing from a broken leg. It was all very physical. And when I'm talking about healing, it's much more on a level of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual wholeness and wellness. So in the medical Western world, we're really focused on curing. And, you know, of course, we all want the cure. We all want to be cured from whatever disease we have. And cure really is that, it's the coming back to complete health, but on a very physical level. So not having symptoms anymore, not having disease anymore. And what I realized on my own path of healing really was that even though I still had active disease, active tumors, at one point I noticed over the years that because I brought in all of these practices and tools that I didn't have at the beginning, you know, prior to my diagnosis, I wasn't particularly healthy. My diet was all over the place. I wasn't practicing yoga, meditation, breath work, all of these tools that later came in. And I just suddenly realized that even though the cancer had progressed and got worse, you know, on paper, I started to feel just more connected to myself and more aware of who I was and what was important to me. And something shattering as a cancer diagnosis really strips away all of the rubbish, you know, the stuff that we hold on to. And I think you just get a real sense of who you are and why you're here and what your purpose is. And it's all of that I think is the process of healing. Because of course, healing can happen on a very physical level. And we've been talking about how you can tap into that innate physical healing by being in the parasympathetic state and looking after your immune system and everything. But also healing happens on that emotional level and the spiritual level. And that's something that don't really discuss. We don't really talk about it. And I know lots of people are really put off by the word healing. And when I called my podcast the Holistic Healing Project, a few people were like, what are you even talking about? What is this holistic healing? And yeah, I think it's the side of medicine that's really missing. It's this idea of really looking at all aspects of your life and knowing that you can be healed, you can experience healing without being cured. And equally, I know plenty of people that have gone through chemotherapy, had radiotherapy, had surgery, have been declared cured by their doctors, and yet are a shell of their former selves. You know, have been absolutely broken by what they've gone through, and maybe haven't acquired all of the tools and practices and really the self-awareness that's needed as well to be on a healing journey. So I think it's just so important to keep that in mind, because I think if you do have something like an autoimmune condition, which may never be cured, you can start to feel a bit hopeless. You know, what's the point? Why am I doing all of this? And yet it's just knowing that you can feel better. It's really about quality of life more than anything.
Yeah. And, you know, I've seen some great research on that from an end of life perspective. So, you know, people, whether it's because of a disease or whether it's just because of age, ultimately, there's a lot of research discussing things like art therapy and essentially supporting people express themselves and the healing that comes from that. And I think, as you said there, I think the authors in one paper use this like concept of a sense of wholeness, you know, being a human being. And although there might be some biological disease or test results or symptoms that are abnormal, they're still coming from a sense of wholeness, because there's, I guess, a connection there between the different elements of being human. So as you say, the spiritual and the emotional, and there's a bi-directional relationship there. I was listening to Dr. David Hamilton yesterday. He had a quick clip on Instagram that I listened to, and he was talking about expressive journaling and how studies have shown that influences the status of immune cells, or the number of certain immune cells, which relays really into having a better functioning and a well-modulated immune system. So this idea of our emotional well-being having a direct relationship with our physical well-being is, you know, the whole mind-body connection ultimately.
Yeah, I love David. He's so wonderful, isn't he?
Yeah, he's brilliant.
But no, everything he shares is spot on, because our emotional state does have such an impact on our physiology, and it's so often ignored by the Western medicine. I know on my own personal journey, I was never asked by anybody, be it doctor, nurse, any healthcare professional, how are you doing? How are things? How are you feeling? It just wasn't a question that was asked, which when I was in it, I was so caught up in the, you know, what was going on, and I just don't think I was even thinking. But with the benefit of hindsight and looking back, I just think, wow, they really missed out on asking me. You know, we don't want to suppress our emotions. By not asking me that question, I didn't have the space to open up and say how I was feeling. So I probably suppressed my emotions more than I would have normally. And actually, by opening up, talking about how we're feeling, and then if we do identify that we're feeling you know, stressed, overwhelmed, doing the practices, you know, things like the gratitude and the kindness, the loving, there's a beautiful loving kindness meditation that is, you know, it's just so soothing and healing when you do something like that. It's such a gift to yourself on an emotional level, but on a physical level as well.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, I'm mindful of time. I want to give you a little bit of space before your next call. But is there anything that you would like to sort of conclude with or emphasize? And, you know, if we've got listeners who are going to be, you know, maybe at the beginning, middle, or hopefully towards the end of their own sort of journeys back to wholeness, are there any maybe words of wisdom from your own journey that you'd like to finish with?
I think one thing we haven't really talked about is resilience, which is another area that I've learnt about on my own journey, but just that I think COVID has taught all of us quite a lot about resilience.
Yeah.
And it's that idea that we will all come up against life challenges at some point, even if maybe so far we haven't. It's inevitable, whether it's going to be loss of a loved one or a health crisis or a pandemic, there will be something that comes up. And it's just knowing that we can do something every day to help us on a very, mind, body, spirit level. And it doesn't have to be much. It can be a tiny, tiny action that just keeps you filled up, keeps you topped up, and able to adapt and be more resilient when the crisis comes. So I talk a lot about healing, because obviously for so long I was on a journey of healing myself, and that's really going from a state of physical disease to a state of almost just neutrality, but then there's the next level up as well, isn't there? It's keeping going, so that even if you do get to a state where you don't have physical disease in your body, you're really working on your wellness and your resilience all the time as well, because that just keeps you a state where you're stable and strong and able to adapt and overcome these challenges, really. So I just say that, and then always remember to just be aware of what you can control. And then if it gets to a point where you've done all these things, you've consulted all these practitioners, you've done all the tests, you've tried all the diets, and nothing's shifting or nothing's working, maybe you actually just need to let go a little bit and relax and surrender, and just see if that helps shift something as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think the concept of resilience, that's going to be a really important conversation moving forward ultimately. And as you say, that idea of having kind of like a buffer, so when we next go through a bit of an adverse event, we've got the buffer to help us navigate it, I guess, ultimately. So yeah, I think that's another important topic. Maybe we'll have to get you back on the podcast just to talk about resilience.
Oh, honestly, it's a topic I can talk about forever. I'd be more than happy to.
Brilliant. Lauren, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you, and hopefully we'll speak again in the future, in the not too distant future.
Yeah, lovely. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you in the psychedelic space at some point.
Yeah,
I'm sure
hopefully. Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm trying to figure out at the moment how I can enter that space once it is more accessible in the UK. So whether that's through sort of the breathwork training I'm doing, or whether that is eventually, I came back from my psychedelic experience and I was looking at all the different kind of psychotherapy qualifications, because I was just like, I have to be able to be in this space when it becomes possible. So trying to understand what, I guess, roles and what positions are going to be available and what's going to be needed is something that excites me. So yeah, I definitely want to connect at some point. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and also just knowing that I think this is just one final thing to end on, really, is that knowing that we're all enough just as we are. So whatever background we have, whatever qualification, there's something so healing and beautiful about a therapeutic relationship, not necessarily between an expert and a patient, but just between two people as well. Just bringing that energy and that intention is really lovely as well. And I think it would be a real shame if psychedelics are confined to doctors, psychiatrists. I think we really need to bring the whole team and just support each other and help each other.
Yeah, brilliant. Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. It's been a real pleasure, and
Thank
we'll
you so
speak
much,
soon.
Alex. Wonderful. Take care.